Welcome back to Flooring Experts. We're going to go over scoping and estimating your hardwood projects. Today we're going to go over types of wood. So that's solid hardwood and engineered hardwood, which both can be pre-finished and site finished. So typically when it comes to engineered floors, that's going to go in a below grade or over concrete application. And solid hardwood will be installed above grade or over the top of a wood substrate such as OSB or plywood. First, I want to talk to you today about species. So there's domestic, import, and exotic, and there's also antique or reclaimed wood. Now, domestic being the cheapest and import or exotic being right in the middle, antique and reclaimed typically have a very high price point. Now, it's important for you to reach out to your flooring experts rep to identify these while on the job site, while you're scoping or estimating, to get a clear understanding of what you're dealing with on site. Now, to go into ITEL, those can often be wrong or misleading when pricing out your job. So always get flooring experts involved whenever possible. Secondly, I want to talk about grades. There's different grades within each individual species. Clear grade, select and better, number one common, and number two. There's also cabin grade, and these grades affect the visual appearance. There's mineral streaks, knots, and imperfections as the grades go down, clear grade being the best. Now there's different price points of each grade, so it's very important for you to identify which grade you have in the existing floor when scoping the work. Thirdly, I want to talk to you about patterns. There's herringbone or chevron, and these patterns take a lot of additional man hours along with materials. So you need to factor in additional waste and labor hours to get these patterns done. Some of the higher end homes actually have inlays or patterns within the floor, and these also take a lot of waste and labor hours. It's important to keep those in mind when writing your estimate. Next, I want to talk to you about substrates and what's suitable for hardwood installation. Flatness is the key component. If we don't have a flat substrate, we need to level or flash out skim coat to get a suitable substrate. It's also important for you to consider the moisture. So measuring the moisture content in the wood and the substrate and making sure it's relative and within manufacturer guidelines. If you're installing over concrete, it's very important to use either an adhesive that has a vapor barrier or a vapor barrier underneath the floating engineered floor. Next, I want to talk to you about sand, stain, and finish. There's a lot of things to consider when doing a sand and stain job, and one of them being the contents. Contents either needs to be moved out or packed out, so when scoping your work, you need to make sure to include that in the estimate. Secondly is a 220. Now, some of the older homes might not be equipped with 220, and in order to run those big machines, we need a 220 volt. So that might need to be rented or an electrician that's hired to wire it into the breaker box so we can run our equipment. Now, there's also a lot of dust from sanding and buffing while we're working. Now, we do use a dustless system, but when you're sanding, there's no such thing as a complete 100% dustless job. So that expectation needs to be considered and brought up to the customer. And to bridge into that is oil-based finish versus water-based finish. We typically do 1 coat of stain and 2 coats of oil-based finish with a variety of different sheens, being matte, satin, semi-gloss, or high gloss. Each of those have different price points, so that's another thing to factor in when writing your estimate. Water-based, however, you have to have 3 coats. Water-based finish is also more expensive, and with that additional coat, you need a lot more extra finish. Water-based is typically used when VOCs, somebody has VOC problems or respiratory. Water-based is a great option because it doesn't have those, and it also dries quicker. So to touch on dry time, it's important to stay off of those floors for probably 3 days so that finish has time to cure and process. Water-based will actually dry quicker, and you can get back onto those floors with socks only within 4 hours and move furniture back in within 48 hours. Next, I want to talk about the install process, and the first step is removal. Now, there's a difference between nail down and glue down removal. Nail down being a lot easier, and typically the basic line item is sufficient, but glue down, it can get very complicated, and there's a lot of additional labor hours involved and line items when a glue down removal is scoped for work. Now, even often sometimes we have to supplement, or we incur additional charges to rent a power scraper if it's glued down that intensely. These are all things to be considered when removing either nail down or glue down. Another thing to consider when installing hardwood flooring is the acclimation process. Acclimation is when the wood is getting acclimated to its environment, so it's going to expand and contract based on the environment that it's in. So you want that wood to expand and contract to its natural environment in the individual's home. Now, acclimation, it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. That's why it's important to reach out to your flooring expert rep to see how long acclimation process needs. Some people often think engineered floors do not need to acclimate, but that's not always true. Per each individual manufacturer, they have guidelines which show which and how long the wood needs to acclimate or not. Another note about acclimation is some of the larger projects, or when the homeowner's not there, the HVAC system might be set off. Now, prior to us delivering hardwood for acclimation, the HVAC system needs to be running for 3 days and needs to continue running thereafter through the installation process and for the remainder of the project, so that wood is acclimated and in its stable environment. Along with acclimation, you also have to consider the width of the hardwood that you're putting in. The wider the boards, the more it expands and contracts. So once you get into a 5-inch or greater, sometimes nowadays you even see 7, 8, or 9, you need to glue and staple. The reason is when it expands and contracts and it's a wide board, you want to mechanically fasten it and chemically fasten it. That way seasonal gaps are minimized, although not guaranteed to stop because of the environment that it's in. It does help minimize the seasonal gapping. When scoping and estimating a job that has stairs, it's important to understand what parts and pieces are needed to rebuild a stair properly. Most commonly, people get the tread and risers correct, but there's also to consider scotia molding, stair brackets if it's an open-ended staircase, or even a starter step, which is custom made to the framing that's underneath there. So when estimating, it's really important to identify all of these, or reach out to your flooring expert and have them put together a list of materials to build back the staircase that you're currently estimating or scope writing for. Next, I want to go into toothing in, also known as lacing in hardwood, and when you can and when you can't do it. So lacing in is typically considered for a site finish application, meaning you're going to lace in your new hardwood, sand, stain, and finish throughout. Pre-finish, I highly don't recommend lacing in because you can't match age or dye lots. So it's going to be clear that it's a patch. It would be like painting half a wall, if you will. When you go into the site finish application of toothing in, there's really not a line item for it. So it's important to incorporate labor hours, and that's going to be on how many linear feet of lacing in. If it's 20 linear feet of lacing in, it's going to be substantially more work. And it's also important to consider when you're estimating your labor hours is the width of the plank. If it's only 1 foot of lacing in and it's a 5-inch board, it's going to be 2 boards. And if it's 2 1/4, then you're going to have 4 or 5 boards. So it's important to keep that into consideration when writing for those man hours. And if you ever have a question, Flooring Experts is here to take those phone calls and help you get the right estimate written. Another thing to consider when installing hardwood flooring, whether it's pre-finished, site finish, or engineered, is the floor height. So if you have a 3/4 inch solid and you're going to a 1/2 inch engineered product, door casings, cabinets, stairs, step downs, or any other trim that the hardwood might meet is going to be affected, which obviously costs money to fix, or you have to build up the floor if you're going to reduce the height of the finished floor product with either maybe an OSB or a plywood to get your new 1/2 inch engineered built back up to 3/4 of an inch. Lastly, I want to talk about post install. So what to expect out of your hardwood floors performance and appearance. One thing is that you need to keep your humidity and your HVAC system as stable as possible. That means having it at the same temperature through summer and winter, and possibly even considering getting in a dehumidifier to keep the humidity regulated inside the home. The reason why I mention those points is seasonal gapping. When it gets really hot and humid, your floor is going to expand. When it gets really dry and cold, it's going to gap, which is common. It's not an installation related error or something that is going to lose integrity of the wood. It's completely normal and environmental.